Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Coffee with Our Researchers. I'm Galit Solomon, Director of Marketing and Communications with Canadian Associates of Ben-Gurion University. We are also known as CABGU. We are the Canadian fundraising arm of Israel's only university in the desert region, Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. And we're so proud to share the stories, research, and innovations that are coming out of BGU to a Canadian audience. Coffee with Our Researchers is the brainchild of our Montreal and Ottawa Executive Director, Simon Ben-Simon. As the name suggests, once a month, we sit down with a BGU researcher for a casual conversation over coffee or tea to learn about a hot topic coming out of the university. And so without any further delay, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Simon Ben-Simon, the Executive Director of Montreal and Ottawa for CABGU. And he has a look at today's topic of conversation. Simon, over to you.
Thank you, Galit. Good morning and good afternoon. Guy, nice to see you again. First, let me introduce you, and then we'll get into our chat for today. Actually, you celebrated a birthday not too long ago, born on September 19th, 1967, in Israel, of course. You did your PhD at Johns Hopkins University on the topic of globalization, peace, and discontent, comparing Israel and Northern Ireland. I believe you've been at Ben-Gurion University since 2007, first in the Department of Public Policy and Administration, and then in the Department of Politics and Government. You are presently the chair of the Department of Politics and Government. You are the author of numerous academic articles and books, including the most recent, Policing Citizens, Minority Policy in Israel, which was published in 2009, which is the relationship with the police is an issue around the world. And hopefully we'll have time to talk a little bit about that topic as well. Another hot topic that you're an expert is, and you wrote a book called Between State and Synagogue, the Secularization of Contemporary Israel in 2012. And you also wrote a book called The Failure of the Middle East Peace Process, ? A comparative analysis of peace implementation, Israel, Palestine, Northern Ireland, and South Africa in 2008. And you wrote a book in 2006 on global liberalism and local populism. So you like controversial topics, I see. And let's start off with your evaluation analysis of the Israeli government. A lot of people did not give much hope to this coalition, and we're 100 days plus into this new government. What is your evaluation?
Well, it's a bit early to evaluate, but it's surviving, which may have surprised many people, but it's also very fragile. And we have a history of fragile governments for the past 4 or 5 years, so that's not an exception. But this government might be more fragile than others due to its makeup, which is with many parties who have very different views and different ideas and ambitions, which means that they can easily fall apart. What does keep them together is that most of the parties in the coalition at the moment know that ending this coalition and going to elections might put them in a worse place. So fragility on the one hand, lack of options on the other hand, which makes this government something very difficult to bet on how long it will survive. Members of the government are pushing to different directions. They have their own base to be concerned with. They have their own agendas they need to put on the table. And miscalculations can any day bring this government down. But at the end of the day, I think these parties know that at least for the coming period, there's no better option outside of them. And that might keep them together longer than many believe.
So there's been momentum with the Abraham Accords and whether in the Gulf states or in North Africa, in Morocco, Sudan, how do you think this government or Israel is going to be able to leverage the Abraham Accords for more peace accords, and where does it leave the Palestinian Authority and even Hamas in view of the Abraham Accords?
Well, this government will survive if it doesn't touch these issues. That's the irony. This government has both left and right-wing parties with completely opposing views on what needs to be done. And what they agreed upon was simply not to do anything, not to pull in any direction. So the Abraham Accords can create some leverage if Israel wants to negotiate, but at the moment there seems no will to negotiate. So the Palestinian issue, I think, will depend to a large extent on what the powers, the US, Europe, will decide to do. If the US stays outside or a safe distance from these things, then progress should not be accepted.
So let's talk a little bit about the US. So there's a new administration, very different from the previous administration. There's a new Secretary of State who is quite close to at least his Judaism. And President Biden, how do you see these new relations with the United States?
So this administration is different from the previous one in the sense that it's more committed to a just peace between Israel and the Palestinians, at least in words. And Biden and the Democratic Party within the party, they have members who are, let's say, more critical of Israel and more demanding that steps will be taken towards peace, and Israel will be more willing to negotiate and to work towards a solution. However, I'm not sure, and this is not my full expertise, how much is this administration committed to the Middle East. It seems that it's more focused on China at the moment, on climate change, on internal issues. So while this administration might be, at least in theory or in words, more leaning toward pressing Israel to make concessions and to accommodate the Palestinians, time will tell if it's going to turn also into actions.
Okay. Prime Minister Bennett just came back from a visit to Russia. He actually had to extend his time and spend Shabbat in Moscow. What can we assume is going on vis-a-vis the Russians?
So the Russians have their own interest in the region, especially with keeping Syria stable. Israel is concerned with the Iranian and Hezbollah presence in Syria. And I assume these talks are about how do you manage these two questions. So Russia wants Israel not to do anything that will damage the stability of the Assad regime. Israel wants the Russians to block the Iranians from entering into Syria. And I think, the Russians are playing their game, in which they also don't want the Iranians to be too dominant in Syria. But also they have their own, I guess, concerns with Iran in other fronts. So not confronting Iran directly is another Russian interest. So what they agreed upon, at least that was what was reported, that Israel could continue operating in Syria, but will have to coordinate with the Russians. More or less what was before will stay in the near future.
So let's switch a little bit to your recent book on policing, and you know that policing is a huge issue in many different countries, and I know from previous conversations with you when we first met, you mentioned that the basis of this book was research you did actually in Canada, and which was interesting. We are in if we just take the Montreal example. We are in the middle of a municipal election campaign where the issue of security and policing and even defunding of the police and whatever that means has become a very divisive issue. Please tell us a little bit about your research in policing in Israel and the attitudes towards the police.
So as you said, this research began about, I think, 12 or 13 years ago. And I had this grant to come in and do some research work in Canada. And then my interest was in multiculturalism. I was trying to think of how to tackle this issue. What institution would be the most interesting one through which to understand multiculturalism? And, you know, the obvious one was education, but that wasn't actually something I was an expert on. And neither was health. And policing, I said, well, nobody's really an expert in that, so maybe I'll try on that. And so I spent like a month in Ontario, traveling between police stations and talking to police officers of different ranks, and trying to understand how does the multicultural Canada translate into practical questions of policing. And I came back and I had some thoughts about what I learned, and I published something. And then I began to work with an NGO in Israel that was focusing on Jewish-Arab relations. And policing is a very huge controversial issue vis-a-vis Arab citizens. So it goes a long way back from early statehood, where the police was part of what maintained the oppression or the keeping Arab citizens under very, very strict surveillance. And this has relaxed to some extent after 1967. But in 2000, we had the events in which the police has gunned down 13 Arab citizens. That's kind of a big, huge story among Arab citizens, because while there was an investigation committee that found the state and the police and some of their Arab leadership at fault, no officers were charged. No officers were brought to trial. This kind of a huge kind of cloud hanging over the relations of Arab citizens and Jewish citizens. But when I began to do the research, we were surprised to discover that the main concern among Arab citizens was not so much over-policing, but under-policing. So I had kind of a switch in about 15 years ago, and it's become more and more obvious, where Arab citizens' main concern is the lack of policing, which renders them to be very, very vulnerable to crime and to violence and to really horrendous murder rate. So that's kind of the story of policing and Arab citizens.
Which we see today is just in the last month has become came back as a huge issue in Israel.
It's spiraled out of control. And
right.
There are many explanations for that, and I can name few. I mean, first, you can talk about kind of the general sociological sense of a traditional society is being modernized and kind of breaking apart. So you have like the old system of norms and the elders and tradition that keeps them together. And when they modernize, you lose some of these issues. Add to that the fact of discrimination of Arabs that are lagging behind in employment and education and infrastructure and lack of housing. So that's another big issue. Add to that the abundance of illegal weapons in huge numbers. And add to that police has not been present in many of these towns and villages. You have a situation that's spiraled out of control. So just to make things more clear, Arabs are about 20% of Israeli population, but the murder rates, they are about 60% happen among Arab citizens. So more than 3 times their size and population.
And your research includes 2 other populations, the ultra-Orthodox and the Jewish Ethiopian community in Israel. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So the Ethiopians are an interesting case because they're kind of a relatively new immigration, at least in large numbers. And what we have seen among Ethiopians, especially young people, was something that reminds us of what we see in North America. of skin color being a cause for being arrested or being stopped by the police, more violence towards young Ethiopians, kind of being profiled very much by the police. And this erupted about 6-7 years ago, when a young Ethiopian soldier was beaten up by police officers. And with this was caught on tape and became viral. And it really caused a huge uproar among young Ethiopian people who were actually saying, well, it happened to me as well. So before, this was kind of a sporadic stories here and there. Now suddenly it became like in the open. And you had those demonstrations, and later you had a committee, a government committee, trying to come to terms with these issues. And you had more stories of Ethiopians being beaten by the police or even shot to death by police. And if you look at each story individually, you might say, well, this is incidental. It just happened by accident. But when you piece the dots together, you do get a feeling that skin color matters, and that the Israeli society does have its own version of institutional racism, like many other countries, not just the police, which needs to be overcome. So Ethiopians are a really interesting case, a sad case, but an interesting case. Ultra-Orthodox, which now we are, the Orthodox, which we're now working on in a new study, we saw clashes between them and the police during the outbreak of the corona, when the state ordered to shut down everything, including schools. The ultra-Orthodox maintained some of their schools, stating that this can't be stopped. Studying Torah cannot be stopped under no circumstances. And we can add to that the fact that they live in poverty in very dense neighborhoods, suspecting police and other state institutions. So you had these clashes between ultra-Orthodox and the police. And now we're trying to make sense of what does that mean? I mean, what can we learn from that? And we see those dilemmas with many minorities, even if they see police as hostile or alien, they also depend on police. So there's all question of, okay, so you don't like the police and you think police are adversarial, but at the end of the day, when you have issues of crime and domestic violence, etc., you do come for police for help. And these are the dilemmas that these communities are engaging with on a daily basis.
Right. I recently found out that you are involved, or you're creating at BGU a new center on the study or researching shared society. That's a really vast term. Tell us a little. Can you drill down a little bit and tell us what is meant by shared society?
So my two main researches that we have discussed. One is on religion and state, which I haven't talked about yet, but that's one major issue I'm engaged with. And the other is policing. I think what the two have in common is that they raise the question about how do you manage a society which is multicultural, multi-ethnic, multinational, etc. And you can talk about the large question, like the overarching question of how you define the state and its constitution, which you don't have, but if you had a constitution, and you can talk about national symbols, etc. But there's also the more pragmatic, everyday questions that relate to recognition and equality, and how do you make institutions able to accommodate those differences? So we can think about hospitals or schools or police stations, which have in practice to engage with those diversities. So they have to meet different people of different cultures with different views of how things should be done and with different sensitivities. And that is where you have questions of legitimacy and of willingness to cooperate and of trust. So this institution, if it will come about, will actually be a place where we engage with those questions on how to create a shared society, which means, on the one hand, engaging with the large questions, but also with the more mid-level institutional questions of policing, health system, and educational systems.
So let's deal a little bit with the issue of religion and state, or the separation of religion and state in Israel, or the lack thereof separation. And many of us have been to Israel many times, and the paradoxes are of the role of religion in Israel, or the secular nature, at the same time the secular nature of Israelis and Israel is obvious. Tell us a little bit more about where Israel is today. And if Naftali Bennett is the first Orthodox kippah wearing, and most people wonder how that kippah stays on that head, but a prime minister, but for the first time you read that a prime minister had to extend a trip because of Shabbat, and posting pictures of him praying in the morning. Those are important symbols in Israel and in diaspora.
So Naftali Bennett is an interesting case, because when Bennett came to head the National Religious Party, he had a different vision. I mean, the NRP was for many years a party that saw itself responsible to religious issues and to the settlements. They're always like joining the large party in order to maintain their interest. They were a sectorial party. And Naftali Bennett came about a decade ago and said, no, we should be the leaders, actually. We should be actually the party that has a place for secular and religious, who are right-wing, neoliberal, have an agenda of a conservative party. And his second in command, Ayelet Shaked, is a secular woman. And he brought in several secular people with religious people. And his vision was that I'm going to be a prime minister. And this completely failed. I mean, this didn't work out. So what happened until a year ago, this party barely crossed the threshold line. It lost some of its religious base because they weren't religious enough. It did not draw enough secular people. And the right-wing party was the Likud. So this whole Naftali Bennett strategy failed. Now, a year ago, or 6 months ago, he became, by accident, prime minister. I don't think even he believed that would happen. He has a party with 6 mandates. But since he was a tipping point, he was able to get the spot of a prime minister. So Naftali Bennett is religious. On the religious issues, he's relatively liberal in the sense of how he perceives the LGBT community and how does he perceive relation with secular people. But he's religious. But the small kippah, I think, and he's shaven face, and he lives in Ra'anana, not in any religious place. And he was in the military in a unit that was not kind of identified with religiosity. So he's religious. He's American. He's kind of American religious, modern Orthodox, not representative of religion per se in Israel.
Right. So
I think the ultra-Orthodox, of course, don't see him as in any way representing them. Obviously not now with the new government. Mm-hmm. And even within his own camp, I think if you talk about the settlers and the other, even some of them see him as a little too liberal. So now if we talk about religion in Israel in general, so to some sense, we are, so to speak, stuck with an agreement made about 70 years ago, which we call the status quo, between the religious and the secular. Its contents and what it means exactly is a bit blurry. But in a sense, what this agreement did was give the Orthodoxy the monopoly over major aspects of public life in Israel, whether it's marriage, whether it's kashrut, whether it's the Shabbat. And when these arrangements were done 70 years ago, we were in a very different state. It was a poor state, not a consumer society. And since then, things have changed. And we can talk about people that became more secular or more consciously secular. People became more consciously non-Orthodox. So people saying, well, I am I'm Jewish, and I may practice Judaism in some way, but I'm not Orthodox. So I'd like to have my Reform rabbi do the service because I can relate to him much better than to the Orthodox rabbi. And we have the Russian immigration that brought in a huge number of people who are not Jewish by religious laws, but do have a grandfather who's Jewish, which makes them eligible to become citizens. And even those who are Jewish are generally very, very secular. And of course, we have consumer culture, which came in big time. So all these things that began to change in the 80s and the 90s of the previous century are kind of pushing away those arrangements, but not formally, because politically the religious still have much power. So the laws are not changing, but practices are changing. So we can talk about marriage. So we still have Orthodox marriage and divorce, but more and more people don't marry in the rabbinate, so they find ways to circumvent the rabbinate. The numbers of divorce, like anywhere in the world, are going up. We have more and more open LGBT families. So we have kind of changing culture where the laws have not yet caught up with those changes.
Can we expect the laws at one point to be able to catch up? Or is this going to, or is society going to go in one direction and the laws and the political establishment is going to stay status quo?
It's hard to tell because at the moment, I think for many secular people, while the laws are intact, they can live their lives behind or aside these laws. So it's not that much of a bother for many secular people because they can simply ignore the laws if they're not enforced. Now, this is again an unstable system. And now there's a big debate in Israel where they're going to open up the light rail in Tel Aviv. And will this operate on the Shabbat? Well, the mayor thinks it should. If we think environmentally, one of the reasons many Israelis have cars is that there is no public transportation on the Shabbat. So if you have a family and you want on the Shabbat to be able to travel somewhere, you must have a car, otherwise you're stuck. And we have all this suburbanization, which means that people that live outside the city, so a car becomes essential, and you can't rely on transportation because there's no public transport on the Shabbat. Now, not having that, you could say to the religion, it's not really changing anything. People are still going to go and drive on the Shabbat, whether it's on the train or in their own car. And if you're concerned with the maintenance of Shabbat, then you're better off having people on the train than on many cars. But it's kind of a principled issue. So that's just one example of things that might eventually bend the law or change the law. But it really depends on the political developments because the religious are still growing in numbers. They're politically very well organized. So they'll try and prevent any change.
But do you think that we could expect now that the ultra-Orthodox parties for the first time in many years are not in the government, that it will serve a little bit as a moderating factor, that they will be able to say, okay, we're able to moderate our stance in order to rejoin future governments?
I doubt it because their constituencies are very, very religious and very principled. And now this government is trying to do some changes, like kind of reforming some of the kashrut laws and trying to break down the rabbinate monopoly into more kind of a privatizing it. It has a huge uproar of, you're killing the Jewish state or whatever. So even these semi-minor changes are encountering so much opposition. And while the ultra-Orthodox parties are in the opposition, I think most politicians don't want to break the ties too much with them. So I think the centrist parties know that at some point you might need them. So maybe we don't alienate them that much.
Okay, I just looking at our time here, just let's finish up on, let's promote BGU and the Department of Politics and Government. So what makes you special in the department? What makes you, not you, Guy Ben-Porat, but the department In Israel, what makes you distinct from other political science departments in other universities?
So we are the youngest department. We are about 23 or 24 years old. We were established with the idea of doing something a bit different. And a bit different meant that we are more diverse in what we do. So we are a small faculty, but we have among us one person who is an MD, is training, who became a political scientist. We have historians. We have people who came from law. We had, in the past, we had architects who all kind of made their transition into politics and government, but we are trying to be very diverse. Also, I think Ben-Gurion in our department particularly has a very kind of a lively communal atmosphere. So I went to Tel Aviv for my undergrads, and that was a department you came to study, then you went home and nothing was in between. We're a much more engaging department. You're welcome to look into our website, which is our Facebook page, which is in Hebrew, but nevertheless, you can see that we're very active. Yeah. And we're really trying to make it in kind of a community where we think of students as partners with us in creating something special. And coming from the periphery, we think that we have to say things about social justice and about diversity and about equality. And we're trying to make our voice heard and also have our students be our delegates for the future.
Great. Guy, thank you very much. This was great. Good to see you again, and hopefully we'll be able to see each other in person soon over a good hummus. I know that hummus and olives are your thing, and we also share love of jogging, so maybe next time we'll go for a morning jog and a good hummus lunch in Beersheba.
Done. Thank you.
All right, Guy and Simon, thank you both so much. Another fascinating conversation. And to our viewers, we hope that you enjoyed our coffee date today. If you would like to learn more about the work and research that's being conducted at BGU, please be sure to visit our website. That's www.bengurion.ca. And while you're on our website, you will be prompted to sign up for our newsletter. So we hope you'll do that. You can also follow us on social media. We are on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Coffee with our researchers.